All right, and welcome back to the channel. Just continuing from last week where I was talking about transitioning from Magic the Gathering to Pokemon, today we're going to go a little bit deeper into starting deck building. We're going to be doing a little bit of prioritizing and thinking about what kind of cards and how to evaluate cards today. In today's episode, we're only going to focus on trainer cards, specifically supporters and some items. And then we'll also go into like the actual Pokemon themselves in the next episode in the series. But for today, we're just going to focus on trainers. Now, the cool thing about all these trainer cards is they're kind of like spells in Magic, but they're colorless. They don't have, specific decks that they go into. Most of them don't. Some of them are supporting fighting type or water type, grass type, things like that. They do have those, but for the most part, most trainer cards can be used by any deck. So as a result of that, when you're actually evaluating cards, you kind of have to keep that in mind that, a lot of times these cards can be used as a skeleton. So if what you're looking to do is you're just wanting to build a competitive deck and figure out what's out there, the tactic you probably want to take is just go to a website like Limitless TCG and look up Pokemon decks. And then you can kind of see what most decks will run as their trainer package. So in that kind of situation, you'll probably see any combination of these kinds of cards. You'll probably see like an Ultra Ball or Buddy Buddy Poffin or Pokepad for your search. And then for your card draw, you'll usually see Lily's Determination. For gusting effects, you'll usually see Boss's Orders. And then for recursion, you'll probably have something like Night Stretcher, one or two Night Stretchers. You might have something like Air Balloon, things like that to help you retreat. But these are pretty much a standard. Almost all decks will run these. You can make modifications, of course, depending on the needs of your deck. But if what you're doing is like, I want to build a deck quick, I want it to be competitive, this is going to kind of be the backbone of that deck. So I would suggest kind of looking into that. But if you want to go deeper than that and you want to start evaluating cards on your own and not necessarily looking at what's in the meta, things like that, maybe you're just playing kitchen table, maybe you're just playing with your friends, or maybe you're just not taking it that seriously and you just want to have the ability to say, hey, you know what? What's a good card? So these are some of the things that I look at when I'm evaluating what kind of cards to use. So I look at four things. First of all, I look at card type, I look at consistency, I look at the rate, and then I look at disadvantages / special cases. So we'll kind of go into each one of those. As I kind of mentioned earlier, the type is important because it helps figure out, what kind of cards I'm going to use and what kind of power level those cards will have, and if I can repeat those kinds of cards. So I usually prioritize items because items are ones that I can use multiple times in a turn. So I can do a Pokepad and then another Pokepad or a Buddy Buddy Poffin. If I have them in my hand, I can do them. That's really, really important if you're trying to repeat an effect. That is number one, is the card type. So I usually prioritize, if I can, items over supporters. And then if I need to, supporters are obviously very powerful, so I'll use supporters, but because they are powerful, they can only be used, like I said, once per turn. The second one is consistency. What does consistency mean in Pokemon? Because it doesn't require, a mana cost or using energy to run these things, it just means how dependable is the effect. That's really what consistency means to me. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of effects in Pokemon that require coin flips. Yes, it makes it fun, it makes it random, those are all cool things. However, when I'm trying to evaluate the power level of a card, I really want to see effects that I can rely on, I can consistently use, rather than ones where I might not be able to use it. For example, would be comparing like Nest Ball to Pokeball. So yes, I can only search for a basic Pokemon and put it into my bench, then I shuffle my deck. But a Pokeball, I have to flip a coin. If it's heads, I can search for any Pokemon, reveal it and put it into my hand, then I shuffle my deck. Which is cool because it allows you to find, different kinds of Pokemon. But if it comes down to a clutch type part of the game and I'm looking for a specific Pokemon, I throw Pokeball, but then I flip a coin and it's tails, I don't get to do anything. So there is that part. Now, if you just want to have fun and that's something that you're looking for, cool, more power to you. That is definitely an option. That also happens here with Pokemon Catcher and Counter Catcher. So Counter Catcher says you can only play this card if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent. So yes, you're limited. However, if you do have more prize cards remaining, you can gust your opponent's Pokemon. Switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. That's cool. I can control what's happening in the game, and I can keep track of that. Rather than Pokemon Catcher, which flips a coin. If heads, you can switch it. You can do the gust. If tails, you don't. So again, it's just that consistency. And then lastly is to kind of emphasize the point, the difference in Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer. Enhanced Hammer only allows you to discard a special energy from one of my opponent's Pokemon. However, Crushing Hammer, I flip a coin, and if it's heads, I can discard any energy from one of my opponent's Pokemon. So if you want that randomness, you can definitely do that. I prefer building decks where it's a little bit more consistent. So that's something that I do. Next, we have rate of return. So rate, usually people think about creatures in Magic, what you're getting out of it. And we'll talk about that in the next part of the series where we talk about actual Pokemon and the rate for those Pokemon. But we can actually talk about it in kind of simple terms, and I'll show it with specific cards. So there's 3 cards here that allow you to shuffle your hand into your deck and then draw more cards. We have Lily's Determination, we have Cynthia, and then we have Shauna. They all do the same things, like I said. So you shuffle your hand into your deck and then you draw a certain amount of cards. Lily's Determination says you shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. If you still have exactly 6 prize cards remaining, you can draw 8 cards. At minimum, you draw 6 cards. Depending on what part of the game it's in, you can draw 8 cards. So that's cool. The floor is 6 cards. Cynthia, shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. So Cynthia is the floor of Lily's Determination. You can never do more than that, but you can at least do the 6 cards. So that's good. And then Shauna here is shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 5 cards. So it's less. Why would different cards be printed? Well, they were standard legal at different times. So Cynthia was previously standard legal a while ago, and Shauna even more before that. So you have a limited card pool, and they kind of control like the power level. At that period of time, Shauna was probably the only card draw you could have at that point where you shuffled your hand and then drew a number of cards. So you didn't really have much of a choice. However, in Expanded, you can choose all of these. So in that situation, why would you ever choose Shauna as far as power level goes? 9 times out of 10, I'm always going to pick Lily's Determination because I get to have at least a higher floor with 1 more card and then possibly 2 more cards depending on what part of the game it is. Same thing with Cynthia. Cynthia's really, really good, just not as good as Lily's Determination. So that's how I kind of look at rate here. Another example of that is Professor's Research and Carmine. So Carmine is something that's standard legal right now. Professor's Research just rotated out. So Professor's Research, you discard your hand and you draw 7 cards. You flush your hand, get 7 new cards. Carmine, discard your hand and you draw 5 cards. Again, 2 less cards than Professor's Research. However, Carmine does have one benefit. If you go first, you may use this card during your first turn. Normally on a first turn, you can't use a supporter card if you're going first. This ability allows you to kind of reset your hand if you don't like your hand. So that's kind of a good ability. Most of the time though, I would still rather choose the option that gives me the most cards. So that is what I choose here in this situation. So that's how I determine rate. And then like I said, in the next episode, we'll go into more detail as to how to figure out rate or evaluate rate for your actual Pokemon. Now, we'll get to the next section here, which is downsides / special cases. There are times where, and I'll go into these examples here, where there are downsides or things that you might think of as a disadvantage, but the way you build your deck, it might actually be advantageous to you. The easiest example to use for that would be things like discard effects. So Ultra Ball has a discard effect. Professor's Research has a discard effect. Most of the time, you don't want to discard your hand. You want to hold cards in your hand so that you can use them. However, there may be situations where it's advantageous for you to discard your hand. The thing about discarding your hand also that's important to remember is that you don't have to have anything in your hand to discard your hand. So you don't actually have to be holding cards. Whether you're discarding 1 card or you're discarding 5 cards or you're discarding 0 cards, you can discard your hand and still draw 7 cards. So that's important to know. The other thing though is there are lots of strategies that allow you to pull cards from your discard. So you're kind of using your discard as a resource, kind of like another library. The cool thing about that is that you get to look through your discard and pull specific cards, which you can't do from your library unless you're tutoring things. Maybe like you have Team Rocket's Spite Ops, which we went over in the last episode, which has the ability Charging Up, which lets you grab an energy from the discard and attach it to Spite Ops. So that's cool because it allows you to ramp up your Pokemon as an ability. But in order to do that, you have to have energy cards in your discard. So how do you do that? Using something like Professor's Research. If maybe you have a hand with a couple energies in it, toss it into the discard, and then, use Professor's Research to get your 7 cards, and then you can do the Charging Up ability. You can do the same thing with Ultra Ball. So that's kind of cool if you have a specific Pokemon or specific abilities that turn that disadvantage into an advantage. So the question, of course, is, what are you going to run? Professor's Research or Lily's Determination? It kind of depends on what your deck is going to do. Lily's Determination allows you to shuffle your hand, which is cool. You don't lose those cards, but you also run the risk of drawing some of those cards again after you shuffle your deck and then, draw more cards. So there's that. Discard, you're going to lose those cards. You're not going to be drawing those cards again. So maybe if you have a hand of things that are just not applicable in that particular matchup that you're doing or at that point in the game, then maybe you want to discard. So those are kind of things that you want to evaluate. All right, I hope this gets you started on the journey of being able to evaluate your cards and looking into them and trying to figure out what's more powerful and how to kind of evaluate what's going to be playable, what's going to be doing best for your deck, specifically for the trainer cards, item cards, and supporter cards. And then we can definitely go into more detail for specific ones, but in the next video, we're going to be going over Pokemon and really trying to evaluate, what you're going to want to do with your deck, how you want it to play. And that pretty much wraps up this specific video, the second video in this Pokemon series. If you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you get notified of new videos on our channel. And then I'll be going into, again, more Pokemon videos as we're going along, as we're evaluating cards and then starting the deck building process. And as always, no matter where you find yourself on this journey, please take a moment, however brief, to take a closer look at life. Bye for now.